Let's dive into a world that many might not even realize exists, a world often hidden behind the facade of care and rehabilitation, known as the troubled teen industry. Imagine being a teenager, vulnerable and confused, sent away from your home under the belief that you'll come back better, stronger, and more disciplined. But what if, instead of healing, you were subjected to a regime of punishment, isolation, and mental torment? This is the dark reality for many who have been through these programs. The troubled teen industry is a collection of facilities ranging from boot camps and wilderness therapy programs to therapeutic boarding schools that claim to reform and rehabilitate troubled youth. These institutions gained momentum in the latter half of the 20th century with the rise of the tough love movement. This approach was popularized by a belief that strict discipline, harsh environments, and even military style conditioning could reform rebellious teens. Historically, the roots of these programs can be traced back to the 1950s and 60s when society began to grapple with the idea of juvenile delinquency as a significant problem. The response, programs designed to scare kids straight, initially inspired by military style boot camps. These were places where children were sent to be broken down and then rebuilt into what the industry claimed would be more obedient, productive members of society. The concept of tough love became a cornerstone of these programs, selling the idea that strict discipline, emotional coldness, and sometimes even physical punishment were necessary to correct a teenager's course. Parents were often led to believe that this was the only way to save their child from a future of criminality or addiction. But beneath the surface, these programs were more about control than care. Children were subjected to harsh conditions, often isolated from their families, deprived of basic comforts, and subjected to grueling regimens. The underlying philosophy was that only by breaking a child's spirit could they be molded into something better. However, what many didn't see or chose not to see was the lasting damage this approach inflicted on countless young lives. The industry grew rapidly, fueled by fear based marketing tactics and the desperation of parents who believed they had no other options. These programs promised quick fixes to complex issues, offering salvation through strict discipline. But as we'll explore in the upcoming sections, the reality was far more sinister, with many programs crossing the line into outright abuse and neglect. This introduction only scratches the surface of a much larger, darker narrative that has affected countless families. The troubled teen industry is more than just a collection of programs. It's a multi-billion-dollar enterprise that, for decades, has thrived on secrecy, manipulation, and the suffering of those it was supposed to help. So, buckle up as we journey deeper into this hidden world, uncovering the stories, the scandals, and the survivors who are now raising their voices against the very system that was meant to save them. In the 1950s and 60s, America was in the throes of a growing panic over juvenile delinquency. The post war boom had brought about significant cultural shifts, with teenagers increasingly seen as a distinct group with their own identities, desires, and importantly, defiance. In response, the idea of tough love began to take root, leading to the creation of boot camps and behavior modification programs aimed at reforming troubled youth. These boot camps were inspired by military training facilities where the emphasis was on strict discipline, physical punishment, and a rigid daily structure. The belief was that by imposing a harsh, regimented environment, rebellious teenagers could be broken down and then rebuilt into compliant, disciplined individuals. The approach was unyielding, with physical exertion, deprivation of comforts, and strict routines forming the core of the treatment. The underlying idea was that harshness and discipline were the antidotes to the perceived moral decay of youth. Around the same time, behavior modification programs began to gain traction, heavily influenced by the psychological theories of B.F. Skinner and others who advocated for operant conditioning. These programs sought to modify behavior through a system of rewards and punishments. Early behavior modification facilities were often brutal, employing techniques that would later be condemned as inhumane. However, at the time, they were seen as innovative and effective solutions to the challenges of adolescent behavior. One of the earliest and most influential institutions in this movement was Synanon, founded in 1958 by Charles Dederich. Initially created as a drug rehabilitation program, Synanon quickly evolved into a more comprehensive behavior modification facility. Dederich's methods were controversial, relying on confrontational group therapy sessions and harsh disciplinary practices. Despite or perhaps because of its extreme methods, Synanon garnered attention and became a model for other programs that followed. By the 1980s and 90s, the troubled teen industry was booming. The Reagan era's emphasis on personal responsibility and tough on crime policies fueled the expansion of these programs. New facilities sprang up across the country, offering solutions to desperate parents who felt they had no other options. The industry capitalized on the fears of parents, promising to reform their children through discipline and control. These decades also saw the rise of wilderness therapy programs, which took the concept of boot camps and behavior modification into the remote outdoors. These programs claimed that removing teens from their familiar environments and subjecting them to the challenges of nature would break down their resistance and foster personal growth. However, like their predecessors, these programs often employed harsh, even abusive, tactics. As the industry expanded, so too did the controversies surrounding it. Reports of abuse, neglect, and even deaths within these programs began to surface, but the industry remained largely unregulated. Despite the growing number of horror stories, the demand for these programs persisted, driven by the desperation of parents and the persuasive marketing of the facilities themselves. In summary, the early beginnings and expansion of the troubled teen industry were marked by a combination of fear, discipline, and a belief in the power of harsh, punitive measures to reform wayward youth. These programs grew out of a cultural moment that equated toughness with care, and they thrived in an environment that valued control over compassion. The legacy of these early years continues to haunt the industry to this day. When we talk about the troubled teen industry, we're dealing with a vast array of programs, each designed to address what they deem to be problematic behavior in adolescence. These programs may differ in their methods and philosophies, but they share a common goal: to reshape or rehabilitate troubled youth. Let's break down the most prominent types of programs and explore their methodologies. Wilderness therapy programs. These programs take troubled teens out of their usual environments and place them in the wilderness, often for extended periods. The idea is that the isolation and challenges posed by nature, hiking, camping, and surviving in remote areas will force teens to confront their issues and develop resilience. Wilderness therapy typically involves a combination of physical challenges, group therapy, and sometimes solo time where participants are left alone in the wilderness for days. The theory is that the harsh conditions will strip away the distractions of modern life and help teens build character and self reliance. However, these programs have been criticized for pushing participants to physical extremes, sometimes resulting in injuries or worse. Boot camps. Modeled after military training, boot camps are probably the most recognizable type of troubled teen program. These camps use a strict, disciplined approach to break down what they see as rebellious or defiant behavior. The daily routine is grueling early mornings, intense physical activity, and strict rules. The goal is to instill discipline through fear and respect for authority. Participants are often subjected to yelling, physical exercise as punishment, and a highly controlled environment. While proponents argue that this tough approach builds discipline and respect, critics point out that it can lead to emotional and psychological trauma, leaving participants more damaged than when they entered. Therapeutic boarding schools. Therapeutic boarding schools combine academic education with therapeutic support. These schools often cater to teens with a variety of issues, from behavioral problems to mental health concerns like anxiety or depression. The therapeutic component usually involves regular counseling sessions, group therapy, and a structured environment intended to create stability. Unlike boot camps, these schools typically operate for longer periods, sometimes years, allowing for more gradual change. The methodology here is less about breaking down a teen's spirit and more about consistent, ongoing intervention. However, like other programs, these schools have faced allegations of abuse, neglect, and inadequate medical care. Religious based programs. Religious based programs aim to reform troubled teens through spiritual guidance and religious teachings. These programs can vary widely depending on the religious affiliation, but they often incorporate scripture study, prayer, and religious counseling as core components of their methodology. The belief is that by strengthening a teen's faith, they can overcome the issues that led them to the program. Some religious based programs also include elements of boot camps or boarding schools, blending strict discipline with spiritual instruction. While some find comfort in the religious approach, others criticize these programs for imposing strict, dogmatic beliefs on vulnerable youth, sometimes leading to feelings of guilt or shame rather than healing. Similarities and differences in methodologies. Across these different types of programs, a few common themes emerge: isolation, strict discipline, and an emphasis on control. Whether it's the physical isolation of wilderness therapy, the emotional isolation of boot camps, or the spiritual isolation of religious programs, these facilities often remove teens from their familiar surroundings as a first step. Discipline, whether through physical exertion, structured routines, or moral teachings, is another common thread. The goal is to instill a sense of order and control that the program leaders believe is missing from the teen's life. However, the approaches differ in how they implement these ideas. Wilderness therapy is about confrontation with nature and self. Boot camps focus on external discipline through a militaristic approach. Therapeutic boarding schools offer a more balanced mix of education and therapy, and religious based programs center their methods around spiritual transformation. Each of these programs claims to offer solutions to troubled teens, but the effectiveness and safety of these methods are often called into question. The diversity of approaches reflects the lack of consensus on how best to help troubled youth, leaving many to question whether these programs do more harm than good. The troubled teen industry has perfected the art of marketing to desperate parents who feel they've run out of options for their children. These programs often position themselves as the last hope, using emotionally charged language that preys on the fears and anxieties of parents. The marketing materials, whether through glossy brochures, persuasive websites, or heartfelt testimonials, paint a picture of transformation, promising to turn troubled teens into well adjusted, obedient young adults. One of the primary tactics used is to emphasize the urgency of intervention. Parents are often told that without immediate action, their child's behavior will spiral further out of control, leading to more severe consequences like drug addiction, criminal activity, or worse. This creates a sense of panic, pushing parents to make quick decisions, often without fully researching the programs. The fear based marketing is designed to make parents feel that they are not just choosing a program, but saving their child's life. Educational consultants play a significant role in this process. These consultants market themselves as experts who can guide parents through the overwhelming array of options. However, what many parents don't realize is that these consultants are often financially incentivized by the very programs they recommend. They receive commissions or referral fees for each child they place in a program, which creates a conflict of interest. Rather than providing objective advice, consultants may steer parents toward the programs that offer the highest kickbacks, regardless of whether they are the best fit for the child's needs.
The promises made by these programs are often too good to be true. Success stories are heavily featured, with before and after photos and glowing testimonials from parents and former students. These stories are cherry picked to present the program in the best possible light, while the failures and negative experiences are conveniently omitted. Misleading statistics are used to bolster claims of success, such as inflated graduation rates or manipulated survey results showing high satisfaction levels among alumni.
In reality, many of these programs have poor track records. Success rates are often exaggerated, and the long term outcomes for participants can be bleak. Graduates of these programs may struggle with trauma, mental health issues, and strained family relationships as a result of their experiences. Yet, these realities are hidden behind a veneer of marketing that promises quick fixes and miraculous transformations. In summary, the marketing and recruitment tactics of the troubled teen industry are designed to exploit the fears of parents using emotional manipulation, misleading success stories, and financial incentives to drive decisions. Parents are often led to believe they are making the best choice for their child, when in fact they are being sold a carefully crafted illusion. When it comes to the legal and regulatory landscape of the troubled teen industry, the situation is complex and often deeply flawed. The regulations governing these facilities are inconsistent, often leaving the most vulnerable youth at risk due to a patchwork of state level laws and a striking absence of comprehensive federal oversight. Current regulations and their limitations. The troubled teen industry operates under a mix of state regulations which vary significantly in terms of stringency and enforcement. Unlike other sectors of healthcare or education, there is no federal body specifically responsible for overseeing these programs. This lack of federal regulation means that the quality and safety of these facilities can differ drastically depending on the state in which they are located. Some states have relatively robust regulations that require regular inspections, licensing, and the employment of certified professionals, while others have minimal oversight, allowing virtually anyone to open and run a facility. For example, states like California and Oregon have implemented stricter licensing requirements and mandatory reporting of incidents, but many other states lack such rigorous standards. In some states, these programs are not even classified under healthcare or educational facilities, but rather as private entities, which further diminishes the scope of regulation they face. This fragmented regulatory environment means that while some programs may operate with a degree of accountability, others can continue practices that may be harmful or even abusive with little to no external scrutiny. Loopholes and evasion tactics. The absence of unified federal oversight has allowed many facilities to exploit legal loopholes to avoid stringent regulations. One common tactic is for these programs to register as religious institutions or boarding schools, classifications that often come with fewer regulatory requirements. By doing so, they can bypass many of the rules that would otherwise apply to healthcare or therapeutic facilities, such as mandatory staff qualifications, patient rights protections, and regular inspections. Another method some programs use to evade oversight is by relocating to states with the least restrictive regulations. States with lax laws or minimal enforcement become havens for these facilities, allowing them to operate with relative impunity. Additionally, because there is no national database tracking incidents or violations across state lines, facilities with a history of abuse or negligence can simply close down in one state and reopen in another under a different name, effectively erasing their past and continuing their operations with little interference. State by state variations. The variation in state laws and enforcement practices creates a landscape where the safety and treatment of teens can depend heavily on their location. In states with more rigorous oversight, programs might be required to adhere to specific standards of care, including staff training, resident to staff ratios, and the implementation of evidence based therapeutic practices. These states may also mandate reporting of abuse allegations and conduct regular audits to ensure compliance. Conversely, in states with minimal regulation, facilities can operate with little regard for the welfare of their residents. In these places, there may be no requirement for staff to have formal therapeutic training, no routine inspections, and no mechanisms for residents to report abuse or neglect safely. Enforcement is often weak, with state agencies lacking the resources or authority to hold these facilities accountable effectively. This discrepancy not only endangers the teens within these programs, but also undermines the credibility of the industry as a whole. In conclusion, the legal and regulatory landscape of the troubled teen industry is deeply fragmented, with significant gaps that allow for exploitation and abuse. The lack of federal oversight, coupled with the varied and often inadequate state regulations, creates a perilous environment where the safety and well being of teens can be compromised. For real change to occur, there needs to be a concerted effort to establish consistent and forcible standards across all states, ensuring that these programs are held to the highest levels of accountability and that the rights and safety of the youth in their care are prioritized above all else. Life inside a troubled teen program is often a stark departure from what most people would consider normal or healthy for adolescents. These programs, whether they are boot camps, therapeutic boarding schools, or wilderness therapy setups, tend to impose a rigid and highly controlled environment on the teens who are sent there. Understanding what daily life is like in these facilities sheds light on the harsh realities many of these young people face. A typical day in a troubled teen program. A day in one of these programs typically starts early, often before sunrise. The structure is militaristic, with strict schedules that leave little room for personal time or relaxation. Teens are usually awakened by loud alarms or instructors shouting commands, immediately setting a tone of urgency and discipline. Morning routines might include making beds with military precision, performing physical exercises, and adhering to a specific dress code. Meals are often quick, simple, and sometimes nutritionally inadequate, served in a communal setting where silence is either enforced or conversation is tightly controlled. The day is filled with activities designed to instill discipline, obedience, and in many cases, submission. These activities can range from physical labor, such as cleaning, outdoor work, or building projects, to forced marches or runs in wilderness programs. Education, if provided, is usually secondary to the program's primary goal of behavior modification. Classes are often rudimentary and focused more on maintaining control than on actual learning. Therapy sessions, when they occur, are sometimes group based, with little attention paid to the individual needs of the participants. These sessions can be confrontational and are designed to break down the teen's defenses, often leading to emotional distress. The use of isolation, physical punishment, and psychological manipulation. One of the most concerning aspects of life in these programs is the use of isolation and physical punishment as tools for behavior control. Isolation, often referred to as solitary confinement in the context of these programs, involves placing a teen in a small, often windowless room for hours, days, or even weeks as a form of punishment. This practice can have severe psychological effects, leading to feelings of loneliness, depression, and despair. Physical punishment is also commonly used, particularly in boot camp style programs. This can include forced exercise to the point of exhaustion, withholding food or water, or even corporal punishment. The underlying message is clear: obedience is mandatory, and any deviation from the rules will be met with swift and severe consequences. Psychological manipulation is perhaps the most insidious tool used in these programs. Teens are often subjected to verbal abuse, humiliation, and mind games designed to break down their sense of self-worth and autonomy. In group therapy settings, participants might be encouraged to criticize each other harshly, fostering an environment of distrust and fear. This manipulation extends to the way information is controlled. Teens might be told that their parents don't want them anymore, or that the only way to return home is to fully comply with the program's demands. First-hand accounts from survivors. Survivor stories paint a harrowing picture of what life inside these programs is really like. Many former participants describe experiences of constant fear where even the smallest infraction could lead to severe punishment. One survivor recalls being placed in isolation for weeks with only minimal human contact, causing them to feel like they were losing their mind. Another tells of being forced to run for miles without water as punishment to the point of collapsing from exhaustion. These first-hand accounts also highlight the long-term impact of the psychological tactics used. Survivors often speak of enduring feelings of worthlessness, anxiety, and PTSD long after leaving the program. They describe how the experience of being constantly belittled and controlled left deep emotional scars, making it difficult to trust others or feel safe in the world. In conclusion, daily life in a troubled teen program is far from the nurturing, rehabilitative environment that these facilities often claim to provide. Instead, it is a harsh, punitive system that relies on fear, control, and manipulation to enforce compliance. The stories of those who have survived these programs serve as a powerful testament to the need for greater oversight and reform in an industry that has long operated in the shadows. The psychological impact on teens who have gone through troubled teen programs can be profound and long lasting. These effects often extend well into adulthood, manifesting as various mental health challenges that are difficult to overcome. Long term psychological effects, PTSD, depression, and anxiety. One of the most significant and well documented outcomes for many teens who endure these programs is post traumatic stress disorder PTSD. The harsh, often abusive environments found in these facilities can create a pervasive sense of fear and helplessness, key components in the development of PTSD. Teens subjected to isolation, physical punishment, and psychological manipulation frequently experience flashbacks, nightmares, and heightened anxiety long after leaving the program. The memories of these traumatic events can be triggered by seemingly unrelated situations, leading to a constant state of hypervigilance and emotional distress. Depression is another common consequence. The systematic breakdown of self esteem and identity in these programs often leaves teens feeling worthless and hopeless. The relentless criticism, lack of emotional support, and isolation can lead to feelings of deep sadness and despair. Many survivors report that the depression they experienced during the program persists, sometimes worsening over time, leading to chronic mental health issues. Anxiety, particularly social anxiety, is also prevalent among survivors. The environment in these programs often fosters distrust and fear of others, making it difficult for former participants to form healthy relationships. They may become anxious in social situations, fearing judgment or criticism, which were common elements of their experiences in the program. This anxiety can be crippling, affecting everything from personal relationships to professional opportunities. How the trauma affects adulthood. The trauma inflicted by these programs doesn't simply fade away as teens grow older. It often intensifies and manifests in various aspects of adult life. Many survivors struggle with building and maintaining healthy relationships due to the deep seated mistrust and fear ingrained during their time in these programs. They might find it challenging to connect with others, fearing the same kind of betrayal and manipulation they experienced as teens. In addition to relational difficulties, survivors often face challenges in their careers. The anxiety and PTSD can make it difficult to function in high stress environments or handle constructive criticism, which might trigger memories of the verbal and psychological abuse they endured. Depression can lead to a lack of motivation and a pervasive sense of hopelessness, hindering career progress and personal growth. Moreover, the emotional scars left by these programs can lead to substance abuse and self harm as coping mechanisms. Unable to find solace in healthy relationships or professional achievements, some survivors turn to alcohol, drugs, or self destructive behaviors as a way to numb the pain and escape the memories. Testimonies from mental health professionals. Mental health professionals who have worked with survivors of these programs often describe the psychological damage as severe and complex. Therapists report that many survivors exhibit symptoms similar to those seen in victims of prolonged abuse or combat veterans. The combination of physical, emotional, and psychological trauma creates a layered effect that is challenging to treat. Dr. Lisa Aronson, a psychologist specializing in trauma, explains that the systematic breakdown of an individual's identity in these programs can result in a fractured self, where the person struggles to integrate their past experiences with their present identity. This disintegration can lead to persistent feelings of disconnection, both from oneself and from others, making the healing process particularly challenging. Another therapist, Dr. Michael Gunderson, highlights the importance of addressing the trauma in a holistic manner. He emphasizes that traditional talk therapy alone is often insufficient. Survivors may benefit from a combination of approaches, including cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, trauma focused therapy, and somatic therapies that address the physical manifestations of trauma. In summary, the psychological impact on teens who have gone through troubled teen programs is severe and long lasting, affecting their mental health, relationships, and overall quality of life well into adulthood. The trauma endured in these programs requires comprehensive and sensitive treatment to help survivors rebuild their lives and regain a sense of self that was systematically stripped away. The troubled teen industry has been marred by numerous high profile cases of abuse and neglect, where the mistreatment of teens has led to severe injury and even death. These cases have brought significant national attention to the industry, highlighting the urgent need for reform and stricter regulations. High profile cases of abuse and neglect. One of the most notorious cases is that of Erin Bacon, a 16-year-old who died in 1994 while attending a wilderness therapy program in Utah. Erin was denied proper medical care for weeks as he suffered from a perforated ulcer, which led to his death. His case drew widespread attention due to the shocking neglect and harsh conditions he endured, including being forced to hike long distances without adequate food or rest despite his deteriorating condition. Another tragic case is that of Martin Lee Anderson, a 14-year-old who died in 2006 after being physically restrained and beaten by guards at a Florida boot camp. Martin had been subjected to a brutal regimen that included being forced to inhale ammonia while restrained, leading to his collapse and subsequent death. The case sparked outrage and led to the closure of the boot camp, as well as criminal charges against the guards involved. In 2007, Erica Harvey, a 15-year-old, died from dehydration and heat exhaustion at a wilderness therapy program in Georgia. Erica was forced to hike in extreme heat without sufficient water, and her repeated pleas for medical attention were ignored by staff. Her death resulted in a lawsuit and a significant outcry from the public, prompting a reevaluation of the safety protocols in similar programs. National attention and industry response. These cases, among others, have brought the troubled teen industry under intense scrutiny. Media coverage, public outrage, and advocacy from survivors and their families have forced the industry to confront the dark reality of its practices. The exposure of these abuses has led to calls for increased regulation and oversight, with some states enacting stricter laws to protect the rights and safety of teens in these programs. The industry's response to these scandals has been mixed. Some programs have made efforts to reform, implementing better safety protocols, improving staff training, and increasing transparency. However, many facilities have resisted change, continuing to operate with minimal oversight and accountability. In some cases, programs have simply rebranded or relocated to states with less stringent regulations, evading scrutiny while continuing to operate in ways that put teens at risk. The lack of a unified federal regulatory framework means that the industry remains a patchwork of varying standards and practices, with many programs still able to operate under the radar. The high profile cases of abuse and neglect have undoubtedly shone a light on the worst aspects of the industry, but much work remains to be done to ensure that all teens in these programs are protected from harm. In conclusion, the notable cases of abuse and neglect in the troubled teen industry have served as a stark reminder of the potential dangers these programs pose. While these tragedies have brought about some positive changes, the industry as a whole continues to face significant challenges in ensuring the safety and well being of the teens in its care. The push for greater oversight, accountability, and reform remains critical to preventing further harm. Survivor stories from the troubled teen industry are some of the most powerful and compelling testimonies against the practices that have long been hidden from public view. These stories are filled with pain, resilience, and ultimately hope as those who endured unimaginable hardships come forward to share their experiences and advocate for change. Personal stories from survivors. Many survivors describe their time in these programs as a living nightmare. For instance, one survivor recalls being sent to a wilderness therapy program where she was subjected to grueling physical challenges with little food or water, often in extreme weather conditions. She was isolated from her peers and family, with no way to reach out for help. Another survivor talks about the psychological abuse she faced at a therapeutic boarding school, where staff used manipulation and intimidation to break down her self esteem, leaving her feeling worthless and alone. These stories are not just about the physical and emotional suffering endured, but also about the sheer will to survive. Many of these individuals were just teenagers when they were thrust into these harsh environments, yet they found ways to endure, whether through inner strength, the support of a fellow participant, or the hope of eventually being reunited with their families. The scars, both visible and invisible, remain long after they leave the programs, but so does the resolve to prevent others from experiencing the same trauma. The role of survivor networks. In recent years, survivor networks have become a crucial source of support for those who have endured the troubled teen industry. These networks provide a safe space for survivors to share their stories, validate each other's experiences, and offer emotional and psychological support. Platforms like social media groups, online forums, and nonprofit organizations have facilitated the coming together of individuals who were once isolated in their suffering. These networks do more than just offer support, they have become powerful advocates for change. Survivors band together to raise awareness about the abuses within the industry, share information about ongoing cases, and campaign for legislative reform. The sense of community and shared purpose within these networks helps to amplify their voices, making it harder for the industry to ignore their demands for accountability and justice. Pushing for legislative change. The testimonies of survivors have been instrumental in pushing for legislative change. Their first hand accounts of abuse, neglect, and mistreatment have been presented in courtrooms, legislative hearings, and media reports, shedding light on the dark realities of these programs. In some states, survivor advocacy has led to the passage of new laws aimed at regulating the troubled teen industry, ensuring better oversight, and protecting the rights of the youth in these facilities. For example, the stories of survivors have played a key role in the introduction of the Accountability for Congregate Care Act in the United States, which seeks to establish national standards for youth residential programs. This proposed legislation is a direct response to the abuses that have been uncovered, and it is largely driven by the voices of those who have lived through these programs and come out the other side determined to make a difference. In conclusion, the stories of those who have survived the troubled teen industry are more than just accounts of suffering, they are powerful tools for change. Through their courage to speak out, survivors are not only healing themselves, but also ensuring that future generations of teens will not have to endure the same hardships. Their voices are at the forefront of a growing movement to reform an industry that has caused so much harm, and their impact is already being felt in the halls of government and in the hearts of those who hear their stories. Legal battles and lawsuits have been a critical avenue for holding the troubled teen industry accountable for the abuses and neglect that have occurred within its programs. Over the years, numerous families and survivors have turned to the courts in an effort to seek justice and reform the system. These legal cases have not only shed light on the industry's darker practices, but have also set important precedents for future accountability. Major lawsuits and their outcomes. One of the most significant legal cases was the lawsuit brought against the Worldwide Association of Specialty Programs and Schools WASP, a network of behavior modification facilities. WASP faced multiple lawsuits throughout the 2000s, with former students and their families alleging physical abuse, emotional trauma, and negligence. These cases often ended in settlements, with the facilities paying out millions of dollars. However, despite the financial penalties, many of these programs simply rebranded or relocated, continuing their operations under new names, which has been a common strategy in the industry. Another notable case involved the Elan School in Maine, which was the subject of several lawsuits before it eventually closed in 2011. The Elan School was infamous for its harsh disciplinary methods, including a practice known as the ring, where students were forced to fight each other as punishment. Lawsuits filed by former students detailed the physical and emotional abuse they suffered, and while some cases resulted in settlements, others were dismissed due to the statute of limitations or lack of evidence. The legal battles surrounding Ilan helped to expose the extreme practices used by some facilities and contributed to its eventual closure. Legal strategies used by families and survivors. Families and survivors have employed various legal strategies in their fight for justice. One common approach is to file civil lawsuits for negligence, wrongful death, or emotional distress. These lawsuits often hinge on proving that the facility failed to provide a reasonable standard of care, resulting in harm to the teen. In some cases, survivors have also pursued criminal charges against individual staff members, though these cases are more challenging to win due to the higher burden of proof required in criminal court. Another strategy has been the use of class action lawsuits, where multiple plaintiffs band together to file a single lawsuit against a program or network of programs. This approach can be powerful because it demonstrates a pattern of abuse across different cases, making it harder for the program to dismiss the claims as isolated incidents. Class action lawsuits can also attract more media attention, putting additional pressure on the facility and its operators. However, these legal strategies are not without challenges. One of the biggest obstacles is the statute of limitations, which varies by state and can prevent survivors from filing lawsuits if too much time has passed since the alleged abuse occurred. Additionally, many programs require parents to sign liability waivers before admitting their children, which can complicate legal claims. While these waivers do not always hold up in court, they can still be a significant hurdle for plaintiffs. Challenges in holding programs accountable. Despite the successes in some lawsuits, holding these programs accountable remains difficult. The industry's lack of federal regulation means that oversight is inconsistent, and many programs operate in states with weak regulatory frameworks. This allows them to continue harmful practices with little fear of consequences. Furthermore, even when lawsuits are successful, the financial penalties are often absorbed as a cost of doing business. Many programs simply pay the settlements and continue operating, or they close down and reopen under a new name. This cycle of rebranding makes it challenging for regulators and advocates to track and shut down abusive programs. Moreover, the emotional and financial toll of pursuing legal action can be overwhelming for survivors and their families. Legal battles can drag on for years, and the burden of proof often rests heavily on the plaintiffs, who must relive their traumatic experiences in court. Despite these challenges, the courage of those who have pursued legal action has been instrumental in exposing the abuses within the troubled teen industry and pushing for greater accountability and reform. In conclusion, while legal battles and lawsuits have played a crucial role in challenging the troubled teen industry, they are not a panacea. The systemic issues that allow these abuses to persist require a combination of legal action, regulatory reform, and continued advocacy from survivors and their allies. Only by addressing these challenges on multiple fronts can we hope to protect future generations of teens from suffering the same fate. The legal landscape surrounding the troubled teen industry is fraught with challenges, but over the years, several major lawsuits have been pivotal in exposing the abuses within these programs and seeking justice for the victims. Major lawsuits and outcomes. One of the most significant lawsuits was filed against the WASP Worldwide Association of Specialty Programs, a network of facilities notorious for their harsh methods. Former students and their families brought multiple lawsuits against WASP throughout the 2000s, alleging physical abuse, psychological torture, and neglect. Although some of these cases were settled out of court, they played a crucial role in shining a spotlight on the industry's dark practices, leading to the closure of several WASP affiliated programs. Another notable case involved Elon School in Maine, where former students filed lawsuits claiming they were subjected to extreme physical and emotional abuse. The legal battle continued for years, with the school's controversial practices coming under intense scrutiny. Ultimately, the negative publicity and mounting legal pressure contributed to the school's closure in 2011. Legal strategies used by families and survivors. Families and survivors have employed various legal strategies to hold these programs accountable. Civil lawsuits have been the most common approach, seeking damages for the harm suffered. These cases often hinge on proving that the programs violated state regulations, engaged in fraudulent practices, or inflicted emotional and physical harm on the participants. Class action lawsuits have also been a powerful tool, allowing multiple survivors to band together to sue a facility or network of facilities. This collective action not only strengthens the case but also amplifies the voices of survivors, making it harder for the industry to dismiss their claims. However, these legal battles are not without their challenges. Many programs have substantial financial resources and legal teams that can draw out the litigation process, making it costly and emotionally draining for families. Additionally, the lack of comprehensive federal regulation means that these cases must navigate a complex web of state laws, which can vary widely in their requirements and enforcement. Challenges in holding programs accountable. Holding these programs accountable is an uphill battle for several reasons. First, the legal framework governing these facilities is often inadequate, with many states having lax regulations or enforcement. This makes it difficult to prove wrongdoing, especially in cases where the abuse is psychological rather than physical. Moreover, many programs operate under the guise of religious or educational institutions, which can exempt them from certain regulations. This allows them to evade scrutiny and continue their practices with minimal oversight. Additionally, the statute of limitations in many states can prevent survivors from seeking justice if too much time has passed since the abuse occurred. Given that many survivors struggle with the psychological impact of their experiences for years before coming forward, this can be a significant barrier to legal recourse. Advocacy groups like Breaking Code Silence have been instrumental in the fight to reform the troubled teen industry. Founded by survivors, Breaking Code Silence works to raise awareness about the abuses within these programs and to advocate for legislative change. Campaigns and legislative reform. One of the key strategies employed by advocacy groups is the use of media campaigns to bring public attention to the issue. These campaigns often feature powerful testimonies from survivors highlighting the emotional and physical toll these programs have taken on their lives. By leveraging social media and other platforms, these groups have succeeded in building a movement that puts pressure on lawmakers to take action. In terms of legislative reform, advocacy groups have been pivotal in the introduction and passage of bills aimed at regulating the industry. For example, the proposed Accountability for Congregate Care Act seeks to establish federal standards for youth residential programs, addressing the lack of oversight that has allowed abuses to persist. While this bill is still making its way through the legislative process, it represents a significant step forward, driven largely by the efforts of advocacy groups and the survivors they represent. Successes and ongoing challenges. Advocacy efforts have led to some notable successes, including the closure of several abusive facilities and increased media coverage of the issue. However, challenges remain. The industry is deeply entrenched with powerful financial interests at stake. Many programs continue to operate under the radar, and even those that have been exposed often rebrand or relocate to continue their practices. The fight for reform is ongoing, with advocacy groups continually working to ensure that the voices of survivors are heard and that meaningful change is implemented. This includes pushing for more stringent regulations, better enforcement of existing laws, and greater support for survivors. Media and public perception. The media has played a crucial role in shifting public perception of the troubled teen industry. For years, these programs operated largely in the shadows, but documentaries, news reports, and books have brought their practices into the public eye. The impact of media coverage. Documentaries like The Last Stop and Kidnapped for Christ have been particularly influential, offering a glimpse into the abusive conditions within these facilities. These films, often featuring survivor testimonies, have helped to raise awareness and spark outrage, leading to increased scrutiny of the industry. Books and investigative journalism have also played a key role in exposing the truth. Works like Help at Any Cost by Maya Shalovitz have provided in depth analyses of the industry's history and its impact on the lives of teens. These publications have helped to inform the public and policymakers, contributing to the push for reform. Controversies and their effects. However, media coverage of the troubled teen industry has not been without controversy. Some programs have accused the media of sensationalism, arguing that the negative portrayals are not representative of the entire industry. There have also been debates over the use of graphic content in documentaries, with some arguing that it can re traumatize survivors or exploit their experiences for shock value. Despite these controversies, the overall impact of media coverage has been positive, leading to greater awareness and support for reform efforts. The media has helped to bring the issue to the forefront of public consciousness, making it harder for the industry to continue operating in the shadows. Recent years have seen significant legislative efforts aimed at regulating the troubled teen industry. Driven by advocacy groups and survivor testimonies, these efforts have focused on establishing federal standards for youth residential programs and increasing accountability for abusive practices. Key bills and laws. One of the most significant pieces of proposed legislation is the Accountability for Congregate Care Act, which seeks to establish federal oversight of youth residential programs. The act would require programs to adhere to specific standards of care, including prohibitions on physical and psychological abuse, and mandate regular inspections and reporting. In addition to federal efforts, several states have passed their own laws aimed at regulating the industry. For example, California has implemented stricter licensing requirements for youth residential facilities, while Oregon has introduced new regulations to protect the rights of teens in these programs. The role of former participants. Former program participants have been instrumental in driving these legislative efforts. Many have testified before Congress and state legislatures, sharing their stories of abuse and advocating for change. Their courage in coming forward has been a powerful force in the push for reform, helping to ensure that their voices are heard and that their experiences are not in vain. The future of the industry. As awareness of the abuses within the troubled teen industry grows, there is hope that the industry will undergo significant changes. However, the future remains uncertain, with ongoing challenges that must be addressed to ensure meaningful reform. Current trends. There are signs that the industry may be on the decline, with several high profile programs closing in recent years due to lawsuits, negative publicity, and increased regulation. However, many programs continue to operate, often under new names or in states with less stringent regulations. Potential future developments. Looking ahead, there is potential for further reform, particularly if federal legislation like the Accountability for Congregate Care Act is passed. Increased public awareness and continued advocacy efforts could lead to greater oversight and accountability, making it more difficult for abusive programs to operate. The ongoing need for vigilance. Despite these positive developments, there is still a need for vigilance. The industry has proven resilient, often finding ways to evade scrutiny and continue its practices. Continued advocacy, media coverage, and legislative efforts will be crucial in ensuring that the progress made so far is not undone and that the rights and safety of teens are protected. In conclusion, the troubled teen industry has caused immense harm to countless young people, but through the efforts of survivors, advocates, and the media, progress is being made. However, the fight is far from over. It is essential for everyone to stay informed, support advocacy efforts, and push for meaningful change to protect future generations from suffering the same fate. If you or someone you know is affected by these issues, reach out to survivor networks, advocacy groups, or legal resources for support. Together, we can work to ensure that no teen has to endure the abuses of this industry ever again.